book of Acts. We're going to be a little bit longer, as you know, than the church of getting through this book. But we'll just keep going until we end up at the end of Acts. We're in Acts chapter 23, verse 23 through 24:9 this morning. And you do not have a printout or an outline because our printer froze up. And there was no one to call it in the middle of the night, so we don't have a printout. But I'll try to keep you in pace with where I'm at. And the title of this lesson is Between a Rock and a Hard Spot. You could call that a lot of things, between the devil and the deep blue sea or whatever, but that's where Paul is right now in his life. But it's going to turn out all right because I've read the end of the book.
Once more, where are we? What chapter?
We're chapter 23, beginning with verse 23. And then we'll go through 24:9, God willing. You know, we always feel more secure when we're in control. Researchers have confirmed this as a fact while studying medical patients. Those who know about their illness and understand the reasons for prescribed therapy respond better to treatment. Cooperate more with orders and recover more consistently. Patients who know less about their conditions experience the highest levels of stress and struggle to heal. As a result, the best physicians have changed their bedside manner. Gone are the days when doctors say, "Do this because I know what's best for you." The best physicians explain the options, what to expect, and the most likely outcome. They try to give them hope and lift their spirits. I'm sure you've heard the term, if they had a will to live, they would live. If they don't, they probably won't. So people who feel in control of their destinies do better in life. I have a proverb written in my notes, which I've had a chance to share quite a bit lately. It's Proverbs 18:14. It says, "The spirit of a man will sustain him in his illness." I thought that was so good. I put it in my notes, and I've been able to send it to some people lately because a fellow I play golf with who's a Catholic, he has a brother, he says, "He's just like you, he's a Protestant." I said, "Good." Well, he became very ill, and he thought he was going to die, but the doctor said if he had a will to live, he could probably live. And so I sent my friend this verse, who sent it on to him, which says, "The spirit of a man will sustain him in his illness." He came back to me and he said, "That was very encouraging to my brother." We also have a daughter who lives in Boise that's been under tremendous pain for probably 2 years. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. She went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and finally someone discovered she had Mal's disease. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it's a terrible disease in the stomach. It causes excruciating pain. So she brought her, after a while, she brought her family members in and said, "Look, I'm going to die, and so I'm going to go be with Jesus. I'm going to be just fine, but I'm going to die." And she wanted all of them to agree with the fact that she's going to die. Well, of course, none of them did. And then she went to the rest of us, her sisters and Tony and I, and probably most of her friends, said the same thing. "It's time for me to go be with Jesus. I want to die." I had a chance to share this with her recently, and the good news is she had an operation a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And even though she still has pain from the operation, it's a different kind of pain. So I think maybe she might be on the recovery. And I think she does too. But her spirit has sustained her. Paul's trial that we saw in chapter 22 had ended badly, from purely a human standpoint anyway. He didn't realize it, but he didn't stand a chance going into the hearing, but held out hope the leaders of Israel might listen, repent of their rebellion, and embrace the Messiah. Fat chance. They weren't going to. After his opening statement earned him a punch in the mouth, Paul realized that the heart of Israel had turned to stone. Well, Isaiah said that some 750 years before. He said, "Seeing you do not see, and hearing you do not hear, because you will not listen." From that day forward, however, the Lord would use the Gentiles to protect his apostle, to preserve his word, and to carry the gospel to the rest of humanity. Before the verse that I'm going to take up here, if you remember, Paul was in grave danger because there were 40 men that had taken a vow to kill him. And Paul found out about it. His nephew came to him and told him. So he sent him to the captain and he told him the story. So that's kind of where the last week ended. And today, the commander who didn't take chances, verses 23 and 24. And he called for 2 centurions, saying, "Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. And provide mounts to get Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor." Think that's a little overkill? To protect one person against, obviously, the Jews who wanted to kill him. The 2 centurions held the equivalent rank of, let's say, a captain or a major today. And each commanded 100 men plus support staff, so there were a lot more than that, plus all the cavalry and everybody else that was going along here. So the commander clearly believed in overwhelming force doctrine. Remember Desert Storm? Commander Schwarzkopf, Norman Schwarzkopf, crushed, probably in that day, was maybe the most powerful nation in the Middle East in 43 days. And about half of that time was taken just to get across the desert with all of those tanks and everything else he took over there. 43 days. So they placed Paul on a horse and sent him to Caesarea, to the Roman headquarters in Judea. So now we're going to look at the letter from the commander Lysias, who was the commander, to Governor Felix in verses 25 through 30. He wrote a letter in the following manner: Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent Governor Felix. You know, they addressed letters different in that day. They put their own name first, and then they put who it was to, and then greetings, and then at the end they just say farewell. Everything's set up front. Kind of like that. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reasons they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. The chief captain saw a good opportunity to get into favor with the governor down at Caesarea. So he wrote a letter that partially true and partially false. He said this man was taken by the Jews and would have been killed by them. Then I came with troops and rescued him, having learned he was a Roman citizen. False. Remember, Lysias thought he was an Egyptian. And he only learned later when Paul appealed to him that he was a Roman citizen. He thought he was an Egyptian. Only when he was about to be beaten did Paul say, well, wait a minute. Are you going to whip a Roman citizen before trial? Now, I've often wondered, because Paul several times appealed to his Roman citizenship, how did they prove they were a Roman citizen? Well, I looked that up. I did some research. First of all, they did have birth certificates in that day. In fact, they kept very good records on births and deaths, particularly in the Roman Empire. The second thing they had is they were pretty good at collecting taxes. If you remember, you had to go to your hometown in order to pay your taxes where they had the records, and you got a record there that you paid your taxes. So there were several ways he could have proved his Roman citizenship. You see, Claudius was in a fix here because if they knew he was about to whip a person who was a Roman citizen, he would have been in trouble. So he told a lie. Now, some say it was just a white lie, or maybe a half-truth, which some say is a whole lie. All lies are lies in God's sight. In fact, here's how severe lying is. Revelation 21:8 says, all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire. And you say, well, wait a minute. We've all told lies, haven't we? Is anyone guilty of never telling a lie? If you have, you're probably lying. But here's the difference. It's a difference between lying and being a liar. Lying is a sin. Liars have taken it on as a lifestyle or a state of being. In other words, they're an habitual liar. In fact, there are 5 other things that that Revelation mentions in 21:8, murderers, fornicators, and all these kind of things that will find their place in the lake of fire. Why is that? Because that's what they are in their entire being. They don't just tell a lie and then confess that or something and not again. They are habitual liars, habitual murderers, habitual fornicators. So a lot of time we have trouble separating the two because we're all guilty of sin. A couple things about Felix. Felix was a freedman, originally a slave with his brother Paulus, under the daughter of Mark Antony. Both men rose to prominence after gaining their freedom, with Paulus becoming a secretary of the treasurer for both Claudius and Nero. Pretty high up. Felix used the family connections and politics to skim the surface of scandals without actually getting wet. Know any politicians like that? He somehow managed to make an impression on Jonathan, who now led the Annas crime family. By the way, he was a high priest, the Annas crime family in Jerusalem. You ever heard of Al Capone? Kind of that kind of guy. As a result, he became the only governor on record to have been born a former slave. It was said he wielded all the power of a king with the instincts of a slave. That's a little scary, isn't it? The commander made a wise decision in sending Paul to Caesarea. He didn't have the authority to rule in a dispute between a citizen and a local government. But this whole thing is riding on God's overriding power. Paul arrived safely in Caesarea in verse 31. Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him and return to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him, and when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from, and when he understood that he was from Sicily, he said, I will hear you when your accusers have come. and he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. Bless you. Antipatris is about 40 miles from Jerusalem and another 25 miles to Caesarea. Many of you have probably been to Caesarea. It's a beautiful place along the coast. It's in ruins today. They decided it was safe to send the foot soldiers back to Jerusalem at this point, and Felix received the letter, assessed the situation, and decided to take the case after his accusers arrived from Jerusalem. So they arrived 5 days later in verse 24:1. Now after 5 days, Ananias the high priest came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul. Now Ananias arrived with some hand-picked elders, I'm sure. I'm sure they were all Sadducees, which were all against Paul. You remember the Pharisees had sided with Paul because he was a Pharisee, and he got them to side with him because they had the same beliefs. With an accomplished Gentile lawyer, probably a proselyte, after looking at his speech, named Tertullus, not an expert in Roman law, but an expert in public speaking. The only case that I ever lost had advantage in my 30 years there, and I was sued probably 100 times. We weren't a bad company, we were a good company. When my lawyer said, when you're winning, people are going to sue you, so they did. Anyway, there was a fellow that was with another company, a competitor, and he went out and started his own business. I knew he was a pretty good guy, so after he had struggled along trying to do his own business for a year or two, he came to me and wanted to sell this very tiny business to us. And so I wanted him probably more than I wanted the business, so I agreed to pay him double what it was worth, just to get him. And I had everything written out in a contract, and it was just very clear. Anyway, he left about 2 years later, and he wanted to be paid for his contract. So I was going to pay him exactly what the contract was, and he said, no, I'm worth more than that. And I said, but this is what you signed. And he said, I'm worth more than that. And I decided, because it wasn't a lot of money, to pay him double what the contract called for. And he says, no, I want more than that. See you in court. Well, we went to court, and after a while, he got a very good attorney, and he asked for a jury trial. This is not a big amount of money. I don't know what it takes to get a jury trial, but he got a jury. So we go into court, and this attorney he had was incredible. The guy had flip charts, and he had all this kind of stuff, and he went on forever and ever. And he brought this young family in, and they were sitting down front with his wife and his 2 children all crying in front of the jury. My attorney looked at me and said, we're in trouble. I said, but we got a contract here, it's very clear. He said, it doesn't matter. That's a jury over there. And they're watching this young family crying. It doesn't matter, we're going to lose. And we lost. And even though it was a very good attorney that's a good public speaker has got a good case, particularly with a jury. Now I'm sure he knew Felix. I'm getting back to Tertullus, the attorney. He knew Felix's background and that he was only interested in 2 things, power and money. So the prosecution begins its case in verses 2 through 4. And when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation saying, seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to this nation by your foresight. We accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy a few words from us. They say flattery will get you nowhere. Well, some people will get you everywhere. So Tertullius opened his case with some careful crafted flattery. He uses the sandwich technique with only one piece of bread because he doesn't end very well. He affirmed Felix as a keeper of the peace and champion of justice. Remember, this is Felix. Ananias, a notorious extortionist himself, undoubtedly knew that Felix operated on both sides of the fence. Today, our politicians, do they do that? Operate on both sides of the fence? Here's the latest. Tax the rich and then give them huge tax breaks. Because politicians need big bucks to get reelected. They're not going to get that from the poor. So tax the rich and give them huge tax breaks. Makes no sense, but the charges against Paul are now stated in verses 5 and 6. For we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him, and wanted to judge him according to our law. They say, first of all, Paul was a world-renowned troublemaker. False. Apostle Paul never made trouble. It was the Jews that surrounded him that came in and caused all the trouble, including riots and everything else. They knew the Romans hated unrest and charged governors with keeping the peace. So Tertullius subtly suggested that disposing of Paul, even though he was a Roman citizen, could be justified as a means of keeping the peace. Number two, they said Paul was a leader of a dangerous cult, a sect of the Nazarenes. That's true. Jesus was Nazareth, he was called a Nazarene, and he was a leader of the sect of the Nazarenes, although it wasn't a cult. It was a religion accepted and recognized by Rome. Judaism and Christianity they recognized as one. And it was one that they said was a legal religion in the Roman Empire. So Rome treated other religions as they expected all subjects of the empire to adopt the gods of Rome. But they said, your religion is fine. You can bring it on in here. You can do as you worship as you please, as long as you adopt the gods of Rome. So Paul, not saluting the flag, expressed contempt to the state. And I want to take a time out here a minute because religion is one of the devil's greatest tools. And the way he's used religion in this world is actually pretty amazing. And I want to talk to you a little bit about two different kinds of religions. One is what we would call non-exclusive religions, meaning that it's a religion that will take in any religions. They say there are many ways to heaven, many roads. Everybody find your own road, and that's okay. So ancient Rome was a non-exclusive religion. They worshiped many gods and goddesses, the main ones being Jupiter, Jung, and Minerva. They recognized and accepted other religions, including Judaism and Christianity, because they're one. And they had no fixed beliefs in the afterlife, except the deceased lived on in the underworld somewhere, sometime. I heard a conversation on TV the other day, very recently. You're all aware that Facebook changed its name. It's now, what, the metaverse? Yeah, okay. You say, what is it? It's the digital world, is really what it is. But they have this fancy name they call it. So one of the guys on CNBC said, they were talking about the metaverse, he talked about it and talked about it. He says, what I want to know is when I die, can I live on in the metaverse? And the other guy says, well, you're talking about eternal life. He says, no. By the way, this guy's a Jew. He said, no, I'm not talking about eternal. I just want to know when I die, can I live on in the metaverse? He goes, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, nobody else did either. But that's how ridiculous these things get. Buddhism, a non-exclusive religion, accepts all other religions. Although Buddha had an eightfold path to nirvana or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, people not on the path are destined to repeat the cycle of the path through reincarnation. But they say there are many roads that lead to heaven, so Christianity, come on in. It's great. Hinduism is a totally non-exclusive religion. Worships literally thousands of gods. Transcendental meditation, which was popular for a while. If you wanted to learn how to do that, there were teachers that you would come in and they would give you the name of one of their demons. They say one of their gods, one of their demons, and you would start to chant that until all of a sudden they took possession of you. Okay, now I'm going to talk about only two of the major religions that are exclusive. First of all, Islam. Muslims tolerate some other religions in some countries that are democratic. I said tolerate. But believe that Islam is the one true faith that leads to salvation as revealed to Muhammad by revelations. They have the 5 pillars of Islam, and you have to go through those and adhere to them in order to get there. And of course, I come last to Christianity, which is not really a religion, which means discipline, but people call it that, so I'll put it in that category. And Christianity is known as Judeo-Christianity because it got its roots in Judaism. And it is the ultimate exclusive religion, and there's the rub, and that there is only one way to God, and that is through Jesus Christ, because he said that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Thus the problem with Rome, this non-exclusive part. Okay, the third charge against Paul said he even tried to desecrate the temple, and of course we know that was false because they said he brought a Gentile into the courts, and he really didn't because they saw him hanging out with them. And by the way, Felix could care less about that anyway. He was only concerned about Roman law, not about Jewish law. So let's look at Tertullius's closing argument in verses 7 through 9. But the commander Lysias came by and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you by examining him yourself. You may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. He closed his legal case with the implication that Lysias had behaved improperly, which, when intervening into what the temple considered a private matter, internal matter among the Jews. And he's walking a fine line here because he's accusing a Roman of maybe doing the wrong thing. Now, at that point, the other temple officials, the Sadducees, joined in the complaint, said, we all agree with that. Felix saw many influential voices that were out there in this crowd, urging him to rule in their favor. All of them potential witnesses in Rome, either for or against him. So what does a guy do like that? He opts out. Okay, now I'm going to go to another type of persecution. And this is probably more discrimination than it is persecution, but it's a little bit of both. And I found this in a book that was a large book, but in this section, here's what it said. In 2017, the organization Open Doors which monitors global persecution, released a report highlighting the top 50 nations where Christians face the most severe persecution. Bottom line, 100% of Christians in 21 countries around the world experience persecution for their faith in Christ. And more than 215 million Christians face high levels of persecution. Nearly 1 in every 12 Christians today lives in an area or culture in which Christianity is illegal, forbidden, or punished. Another group, International Christian Concern, highlighted 3 countries where religious discrimination, a little bit different persecution, but a type of persecution, religious discrimination and persecution have reached a certain level of concern. These countries are Mexico, Russia, and the United States of America. You believe that? I do. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, all who live godly lives in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. Since we didn't have a song written out, we were going to sing something simple that everybody knows. And we have, we're going to sing, well, I'll let Glenda introduce it on the piano. One of the best in the West. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now Christ me. Last verse. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know last days to sing God's praise. And when we first begun. Thank you, class. Thank you, Glenda. God bless you all.